It is a wonderful introduction to the great world of science fiction, of speculative fiction, the art of asking, what if, what if?
Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Today a classic of science fiction, a classic of American science fiction, Replay by Ken Grimwood from 1988. Now, Replay is a very good novel in itself, and it's also a very interesting novel when thinking about science fiction in general. Ken Grimwood is kind of a one-off guy. I know he wrote other things, but really what remains of his work today is Replay. It's been reprinted many times. It's still very much in print. It even has gained some sort of cult classic status in the world of publishing. Now, what is the story of Replay? Very briefly, Jeff is 43 and suddenly he dies. And that's all on page 1, so no worries, I'm not spoiling anything. And the premise of the book really is that when Jeff dies, he is reborn. That is, he is reborn after dying, obviously. And he is reborn not in a different body or at a different time or as a baby. He is reborn, basically finds himself in his old teenager's body. So that's the story. The first time he dies, he is immediately reborn and he finds himself basically in the house of his parents when he was a teenager. And that is the premise of the book. Now, that may remind you, of course, of a kind of trope that has become a trope now, exemplified, for example, by Groundhog Day, the very famous film from the end of the 80s, probably, where a guy relives his life, not his life, but his day, over and over again. And every time he goes to sleep at the end of the day, he wakes up on the morning of the same day. Now, Jeff doesn't do that on one day. He does that for 43 years, or let's say 30, 35 years throughout the book, because again, when he's reborn as a teenager. There is a twist in there, which is part of the plot and accelerates the plot, as it were, which is that every time he is reborn slightly later than the time before. So, for example, the first time he's reborn is, I don't know, say 16, and the second time he's 16 and a month, and another time he's 16 and 3 months, etc., etc., etc. That has, obviously, a sort of impact on the novel, because as you can imagine, the more he dies and the more he's reborn, the closer his date of rebirth comes to his date of death. And of course, eventually there must come a day when his rebirth is basically at the same moment as he dies. Now, do not worry, this is not exactly how the book ends, so in order to find out, you'll have to read it, of course, and I'll try not to spoil anything for you. Now, what is interesting about this book, really, beyond the fact that it's in itself a very, very interesting novel, it reads very well, it's pacey, loads of things happen. Well, first of all, you realize that this trope, this idea of reliving your life, is of course immediately leading to ideas about, well, what if? What if I had done something else? What if I had tried this instead of that? What if I had chosen this path instead of that path? You recognize this. For example, there was a huge bestseller a few years ago by Matt Haig, The Midnight Library. But The Midnight Library, like Groundhog Day, have perhaps the problem of focusing on the individual. That is, if you, John, Mary, whoever, were to be reborn or were to be given the chance to relive your life, what would you do in order to become what? I.e., those books are very often, or those films are very often focused on the development of one person. And that is where Replay is immediately more interesting to me, because we go from a phase where Jeff, the narrator, the main protagonist of the novel, Jeff starts to do the same, that is to focus on himself. What did he miss? What could he have done differently? What can he experience that he never experienced while in his first life? But very quickly he grows bored or disaffected with this very sort of selfish approach to reliving a moment, and he starts to think about the rest of the world, and that is where this novel takes on a new dimension, I think, because it goes from okay, you want to focus on yourself, develop yourself, and then little by little you start to realize that yes, but there is a whole world out there that perhaps you could help, and that is exactly what Jeff will do. So it's not only about personal choices in relation to personal development, it is really about personal choices in terms of how to help others, how to make others benefit from that gift you're given. Now, that will lead Jeff to experiment different ways of trying to influence the world, because yes, you can change events in the new life that you're leading. And of course, as I said, he will first focus on himself, trying to amass as much money as possible by, remembering lottery numbers and that kind of stuff. Becoming very, very wealthy, of course. And first he will indulge himself. That is, he will, find a lot of partners, party all night for years on end, buy an island or whatever. All the hallmarks of selfish indulgence, basically, becoming rich and using that wealth only for yourself. Progressively, he will start let's say, giving more of his time and a lot more of his money, in fact, dedicating his time and money and life to finding either the reasons or the reason why this is happening to him, and of course, solving the world's problems, dedicating his wealth to doing that. Now, that is very interesting in itself, of course, and what is even more interesting to some extent is that, yes, he will try to change events to change the course of the world. For example, he will try to prevent the assassination of JFK in 1963, the president of the United States at the time, of course, which, the world at that time was the Cold War, the Cuba situation, the relationship with Russia, the two great powers, America and Russia, and the world at that time seemed certainly on the brink of the Third World War. So Jeff does his best, tries everything to influence, to change the course of global events and history so as to create a better, more peaceful, more harmonious world, however you want to describe it. But you will realize, of course, that it's not that easy and that you may be able to influence a few things, even many things, even a great many things, but there is perhaps a level at which events happen that you simply cannot influence. And this will remind you, as a reader of that novel, that indeed, as Fernand Braudel used to say, everything is interconnected, and that means that any set of factors at work in history is both influencing and influenced by many, many other sets of factors, and those situations become so complex, so imbricated, that it may not be possible to change things on a large scale anymore. There is, halfway through the novel, a radical change in some way taking place, or two radical changes really. One is that the world that he certainly wakes up in looks very different from the one he's used to, and that's a departure that is explained, of course, in the novel. And two, he will go to the cinema one day and see a film that convinces him that the person who directed the film, a woman, is like him, and indeed she turns out to be like him. And so together, of course, they will also try to use their wealth, experience, and repeated lives to try and first find others like themselves, and to find either a reason for their condition or a solution to it. Now, all this is great, and it's pacey, very well done, exciting, and repeatedly, of course, it is extremely interesting, and that's where I think Ken Grimwood stands out, and Replay, that novel, stands out. Repeatedly, you are exposed to Jeff trying things out in new lives, trying to find a reason to be. Now, still, there are questions that arise from a novel like this. One of them is obviously what if? What if I could do this again? What if I could relive that bit? What would I say? What would I do differently? Would I do it differently? But interestingly enough, there's also a question of identity. That is, who is Jeff eventually? There is a core to Jeff, which is informed by his first life, of course. But as he repeats lives, but never in the same way, as he tries to learn new things, he also basically not only tries to become somebody else, but he also, insensibly perhaps in the beginning, becomes somebody else. So that will lead us to the resolution of the novel, the end of the novel, where Jeff has to sort of perhaps decide or accept who he is, decide or accept or make do with his circumstances. And that in itself is an exciting and very revealing part of the novel at the end. So Ken Grimwood's Replay is a classic, and perhaps there is a reason for that novel to be a classic of science fiction. It's an extremely strong novel on its own terms. It plays with a conceit, an idea, which is in itself very interesting and extremely attractive for any of us, because all of us live with regrets, with the path not taken, of course. And at the same time, it asks very interesting questions about our relationship, perhaps as individuals, with the collective around us, the responsibility we may have, or we do have, or perhaps we don't have, the responsibility towards others, and asking us really to think about the fact that, yes, if we could replay our life, probably we would decide to tweak things to make our current life better or different or more exciting or more rich, whatever. But actually, the real question is not so much there. The real question is, should you not use those lives to help others, to do something that goes beyond yourself? You may remember, you may have read that novel by Isaac Asimov, The End of Eternity, I think it's called. It's an old novel, where basically the premise is that we are at the end of eternity, in the sense that people have become immortals and they can travel back in time and this and that. Very exciting novel. There's lots of things happening. But essentially, the immortals at the end of time are just bored. They've seen it all, they've done it all. And so they think that there's nothing left to live for. And we can contrast that with what happens to Jeff and what happens to, let's say, characters in general in those situations. Is that true? That is, have you not perhaps missed a beat, missed a step by focusing exclusively on yourself and considering that the only role you can play as yourself and for yourself is to focus on yourself exclusively? Again, Groundhog Day, for example, The Midnight Library, are life manuals in many ways. That is, should you be able to relive those moments or have an influence on your past events, then really you should consider being a better person or a more open-minded or open-hearted person or this and that. That's fine. Replay offers us something that goes beyond this, and that asks us to think about not only ourselves, but our responsibility towards others and our place in the world. So, really, in conclusion, Replay deserves the very little money you will invest in buying it, and the little time you will invest in reading it, and it will be amply rewarded. Thank you.